You know, they make all these movies about the war, with the big charges and the tanks and the heroes, but they never get the waiting right. The waiting was the worst of it. And for me, the worst waiting was for the night. The day almost had rules. You'd hear the air raid sirens if you were near a town, and you'd look up and see them, the American bombers, high up in the sky, little silver specks in formation. It was almost a spectacle, like watching a thunderstorm roll in from a distance. Flak would start popping little black puffs of smoke all around them, and you'd watch, wondering if they'd hit one. Sometimes they did, and you'd see a trail of smoke spiraling down, and a cheer would go up. But it was detached. You could see the danger. You could measure it. You could run for a slit trench, a cellar, something. There was a strange sense of order to it all. But when the sun started to go down, that's when a different kind of chill settled in. The conversations around the cook fire would die out. The card games would stop. A man would finish cleaning his rifle, and instead of talking, he'd just stare into the embers. Each of us was alone with our thoughts then. You'd see a kid, couldn't have been more than 18, writing a letter home, and his hand would be shaking so bad the writing looked like a scrawl. Nobody made fun of him for it. We all understood. The darkness itself became the enemy. It was a blanket that covered everything, and under it, anything could be coming for you. We definish our duties, whatever they were, digging a new latrine, filling sandbags, trying to scrape the mud off our boots, and the routine of it was a comfort. But as the last light bled from the sky, that comfort evaporated. You'd try to eat your stew, but it tasted like ashes. Your mouth would be dry. You'd look at your buddies, the same faces you'd seen every day for months, and you didn't need to say a word. You could see it in their eyes, the same thing that was clawing at your own guts. It was a primal fear, the kind an animal feels when it knows a predator is circling just outside the firelight. There was no bravado then, no talk of glory or the fatherland. That was for the propagandists back in Berlin. Out here in the dirt, it was just about the next breath, the next minute. You declutch your rifle a little tighter, not because it would do you any good against what was coming, but because it was the only thing you had to hold on to. It was yours. Then it would start. Not with a bang, but with a hum. At first, you'd think it was your own ears ringing, or maybe the wind. You'd stop whatever you were doing, even if it was just shifting your weight from one foot to the other, and you'd listen. Your whole world would shrink down to your ears. And then you'd see the other guys doing the same thing, heads cocked, eyes wide. And the hum would get louder, turning into a low, steady drone. Then a throbbing. You'd feel it before you really heard it, a vibration in the soles of your boots, a rumble in your chest. That sound, it was like nothing else. It was the sound of hundreds of engines, a swarm of angry metal bees coming from across the channel. The British, the night bombers. That sound meant they weren't aiming for a factory or a rail yard miles away. That sound meant they were hunting us. They were coming for the front line, for our positions, for the dirt under our boots, and we were blind. There were no sirens for this. There was no running to a shelter. We were the shelter, or what passed for it, a hole in the ground. The scramble was always the same, a frantic, silent dance. No one yelled. We just moved fast like rats for our holes. My foxhole was mine and Carl's. Carl was a big guy from Hamburg, with hands like shovels and a laugh that could shake a tent. But when that drone started, he moved quicker than anyone. We'd pile into that damp, muddy slit in the earth, pressing ourselves against the cold dirt walls, trying to make ourselves small, trying to become part of the earth itself. The smell down there was awful with wool, sweat, fear, and the coppery tang of soil. You could taste the dirt in the air. Carl would be right next to me, so close I could feel the heat from his body. I'd look over at him, and in the faint starlight, I'd see the whites of his eyes, wide and unblinking. No words were needed. We both knew. That throbbing in the air would get louder and louder until it was inside your head, a pounding that drowned out everything else. You'd squeeze your eyes shut, but it didn't help. The sound was everywhere. Then the searchlights would snap on. Great, blinding beams of light cutting through the blackness, sweeping back and forth like frantic fingers trying to grasp something, anything. From down in the hole, they looked like ghostly pillars holding up the sky. You'd watch them cross, and for a second they'd catch a plane, a tiny black cross silhouetted against the beam, and then it would be gone again. Our flak guns would start up then, a frantic staccato barking that was so puny against the immense drone of the bombers. The shells would explode way up there, little flashes of orange that did nothing to stop the tide. It felt futile, like throwing pebbles at a giant. And then came the flares, They dropped them first to mark the target. They'd whistle down on these little parachutes, and when they ignited, it was the most terrifying thing imaginable. Night would turn into a ghastly, silent daylight, a cold, magnesium white light that bleached all the color out of the world. It cast long, sharp shadows that danced and jumped. In that light, you could see everything. The splintered trees, the craters from yesterday's bombs, the other foxholes down the line. You felt naked, exposed. That was the worst moment, the moment you knew they could see you. They were up there looking down on this illuminated hellscape, and they could see your little patch of dirt. That's when the praying started, not the proper prayers they taught you in church, with the these and thous. No, this was just a stream of desperate, silent thoughts sent out into the universe. Not me. Please, not me. Let it be 50 meters to the left. Let it be for the guys in the next company. Just let me see the sun again. You make promises to God, to your mother, to anyone who might be listening. If I get out of this, I'll be a better man. I'll go back to the farm and never leave. I'll marry Elsa and be happy. You'd think about home, not the big ideas, but the small things. The smell of fresh bread in your mother's kitchen, the feel of a clean shirt, the sound of rain on a rooftop when you're safe inside. You'd cling to those memories like a life raft. Then you'd hear it. A different whistle, high-pitched and sharp, cutting through the drone of the engines. The whistle of a bomb falling. Your whole body would clench. You depress your face into the mud, your hands over your helmet, as if that little steel bowl could save you from the sky falling down. You try to become smaller than small. You'd wait for the sound to change, for the whistle to become a scream, which meant it was coming right for you. Time would stretch out into an eternity. Every muscle was a tight wire. You couldn't breathe. Then the world would end. The first impact wasn't a sound you heard with your ears. It was a feeling that started in the ground and shot up through your bones. The earth would heave. It was like being inside a drum that a giant was beating. A concussion would hit you, a wall of air that sucked the breath from your lungs and rattled your teeth. Dirt and stones and God knows what would rain down on your back. The noise was absolutely a deafening, shrieking roar that was more than sound. It was a physical force. You just curl up into a ball, hoping, waiting for the silence, but the silence never came because another whistle would start, and another, and another. The bombs were walking towards you, each explosion getting closer. You could feel the heat from the blasts even down in your hole. The air would get thick with dust and smoke, and the smell of cordite, a bitter, burning taste that coated your tongue. You'd choke on it. Your ears would ring so loud you couldn't hear your own screams. You'd just feel your throat getting raw. You'd look over at Carl, and you'd see the absolute terror on his face, a mirror of your own. There was no shame in it. This was beyond courage. This was about survival. It was the most alone you could ever feel, even with your best friend right beside you. One night, a bomb landed so close I thought it was the end. The explosion was a bright, orange flash even through my closed eyelids. The shockwave lifted me right up off the floor of the foxhole and slammed me back down. My head hit the dirt wall and I saw stars. For a second, everything was quiet, a strange, muffled silence. I thought I was dead. Then the sound rushed back ringing in my ears, the crumps of more bombs, Carl shouting something I couldn't hear. I was covered in dirt, completely buried except for my head. I couldn't move my arms or legs. Panic seized me. I started thrashing, trying to dig myself out, but the weight was immense. I felt Carl's hands, grabbing my shoulders, digging frantically, pulling me out of the earth like a root vegetable. When I was free, I just lay there, gasping, coughing up mud. He slapped my back, his face pale in the flare light. "You're all right, Erich, you're all right," he kept saying over and over, more to convince himself than me. We didn't speak of it again. That was another unspoken rule. You didn't talk about the close calls. It was bad luck. And then, as suddenly as it began, it would stop. Whistling would cease. The drone of the engines would change pitch, growing fainter, heading back towards the coast. They were leaving. The silence that followed was almost as loud as the bombs. It was a heavy, thick silence, broken only by the crackle of distant fires and the moans of the wounded. Your ears would still be ringing, a high-pitched whine that would be your companion for days. You'd slowly, painfully, uncurl yourself. Every muscle would be trembling with adrenaline. The first thing you'd do is look at the man next to you. You'd check if he was still there, still whole. Carl would look at me, and I'd look at him, and we'd just nod. A tiny, wordless confirmation that we'd made it through another one. The relief was a physical pain, a draining feeling that left you weak and shaking. You'd climb out of the hole, your legs like jelly, and survey the damage. The landscape would be changed. New craters, steaming and raw, would be everywhere. Trees that were standing an hour ago were now splintered matchsticks. Sometimes a foxhole nearby would be gone, just a fresh crater where your comrades had been. You didn't look too long. You couldn't. That's when the dark humor would kick in, our only defense against the madness. Someone would always say something like, "Well, they missed us again. Must be getting lazy." Or, "That was a close one. I almost spilled my coffee." There was no coffee, of course. It was just a way to break the tension, to prove we were still human, still capable of speech. We'd light cigarettes with hands that shook so badly you could barely get the match to the tip. The first drag of that cheap, harsh tobacco was the sweetest thing in the world. It was a tiny piece of normality. We'd do a head count, a silent tally of who was left. The faces that were missing, you tried not to think about them. You couldn't. If you started, you'd never stop. You just add their names to the list in the back of your mind, a list that got longer every week. Then you try to sleep. But how could you sleep? Your nerves were jangling like loose wires. Every little sound, a twig snapping, the wind in the trees would make you jump. You'd lie there in the dark, staring up at the stars, which seemed so peaceful and indifferent. And you knew, with a cold certainty that settled deep in your soul, that it wasn't over. They would be back tomorrow night. And the night after that, that fear never left you. It became a part of you, a constant companion. It was there in the morning when you ate your breakfast. It was there during the daytime lulls. It was there as the sun began to set. The fear of the dark, the fear of the drone, the fear of the whistle. That's what they never tell you about war. It's not the big battles that break you. It's the relentless grind, the waiting, the sound that froze your blood, and the silence that followed, knowing it would all happen again. All you could do was dig your hole a little deeper, hold onto your rifle a little tighter, and hope that you'd live to see a sunrise where the only thing in the sky was the sun. You want to know what real fear was? It wasn't the daytime raids, not for me anyway. Sure, when the American flying fortresses came over in their perfect silver boxes, high up in the sun, it was terrifying in its own way. You could see it all coming, the flak bursting around them like little black puffs of cotton, the whistle of the bombs, the way the earth just jumped up and tried to swallow you whole. But at night was a different kind of hell, a medic's particular hell. My job was to run toward the screaming when every sane instinct, every fiber of your being, was screaming at you to dive into the deepest hole you could find and pray. I was a stretcher bearer, see, and that was our curse. In the daylight, you had a chance. You could see the craters, you could see the men waving, you could see the red cross on your armband, and maybe, just maybe, the pilot way up there might see it too and have a moment of mercy. But at night, that red cross was just a stupid piece of cloth. It was invisible. You were just another shadow stumbling around in a world that was coming apart at the seams. I remember the feeling of it, the sheer physical weight of the darkness just before it started. It was a thick, heavy thing, like a blanket smothering the land. You'd hear the air raid sirens first, a wail that started low and climbed right up your spine, and then the searchlights would snap on, cutting the sky into frantic, sweeping bars of light, probing for the bastards. You could hear them long before you saw them, a deep, throbbing hum that wasn't like the single-engine fighters. This was a sound that filled the whole sky, a constant, droning vibration that you felt in your teeth, in the pit of your stomach. The British Lancasters and Wellingtons, they flew lower, slower it seemed, and that sound, it was like the sky itself was a giant beehive, and someone had kicked it. Then the flak would start, the anti-aircraft guns pounding away, their flashes lighting up the world for a split second like a monstrous camera, freezing everything in a stark white light before plunging you back into blackness. And then the whistling started. That's the sound that still wakes me up sometimes. It starts high and thin, and then it drops, and your whole body just clenches up waiting for the world to end. My first real night raid, I was green as grass. I thought I knew what war was about from a few scrapes in the daytime. I was wrong. The ground shook like a dog shaking off water. The concussions from the bombs weren't just sounds. They were physical blows that hit you in the chest, knocking the air out of your lungs. Dirt and debris rained down on your helmet, ping, 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 and the air got thick with this awful smell cordite, and burning wood and something else, something sweet and rotten that I later learned was high explosive. You'd be lying flat in a ditch or a foxhole, your face pressed into the mud, and you'd hear a bomb coming down with that terrible descending whistle, and you'd just pray, not me, please God, not me. And then the blast would hit, and for a second you couldn't hear anything but a high-pitched ringing, and all you could see was flashes of light and the silhouettes of trees against the fire. Then after the first wave passed, you'd hear it. Not the bombs, but the reason I had to get up. A voice, somewhere out in that chaos, crying out, "Hilf, sanitator, help, medic." That's when you moved. Your legs felt like lead, and your heart was hammering so loud you could barely hear anything else. You grab your bag, your stretcher, and you just start running toward the sound. You couldn't see where you were going. You trip over tree roots, fall into shell holes, splash through water you didn't know was there. The landscape wasn't familiar anymore. It was a nightmare painting, all shadows and sudden, terrifying flashes of light. You'd see a burning truck, silhouetting the scene in a hellish orange glow, and then it would go dark again, leaving you blind. And all the while, you're listening, trying to pinpoint that cry for help among the crumps of more bombs falling, the stutter of machine guns firing blindly into the sky, the roar of flames. You'd run toward where you thought the voice was, and then you'd stop, panting, straining your ears, and you'd hear it again, fainter now. Mutter, bit mutter, calling for his mother. That was always the worst. That's when you knew it was bad. I found him in a fresh crater, the earth still warm and smoking. The smell was awful, burnt earth, burnt metal and blood, so much blood. I fumbled for my flashlight, my hands shaking so bad I could barely click the switch. The beam cut through the dust and smoke, and it felt like I was holding up a giant sign saying, "Here I am, come and get me." But you had to have light. The beam landed on him. He was just a kid, couldn't have been more than 18. His uniform was torn to shreds, and one of his legs, it wasn't a leg anymore. It was just a mess. His face was pale, ghostly in the beam, and his eyes were wide with a kind of shock I didn't understand yet. He looked right at me, but I don't think he saw me. "Mutter," he whispered. I dropped to my knees beside him, my medical bag thumping on the ground. "I'm here, son," I said, my voice rough. "I'm here. You're going to be all right." It was a lie, and we both knew it, but you have to say it. You have to offer that little bit of hope. That was the first time I had to do triage in the dark. Triage's a fancy word for a butcher's job. It means you have to decide. Who can you save? Who is too far gone? In the daylight, maybe you could assess things better, see the color of a man's skin, the extent of the bleeding. At night, you worked by touch and sound. Your hands became your eyes. You'd run your hands over a man's body, and they'd come away warm and sticky with blood you couldn't see. You'd listen to his breathing. Is it ragged? Gurgling? That's a lung wound, a bad one. Is it shallow and fast? Shock. You learned to tell by the sound of a man's moan whether he had a chance or not. There was a certain wetness to the sound when it was internal injuries. This boy, he had that sound. I got a tourniquet on what was left of his leg, pulling the strap tight with my teeth, my hands slick with his blood. I gave him a shot of morphine from the little syringe I carried, my thumb pressing the plunger down. His breathing eased a little, and his eyes lost some of their frantic terror. That's all you could do sometimes. Just take the edge off the pain. I had to leave him there. I had to. I heard other cries closer, and I had to make a choice. I propped him up against the side of the crater, made sure he was as comfortable as I could make him, and I said, "I'll be back for you, I promise." I had to leave my flashlight with him, shining on his face, because the darkness was the real enemy. I stumbled away into the black, guided only by the next scream, leaving that little circle of light behind me like a grave marker. I never did get back to him. That's the part that haunts you. The promises you couldn't keep. We worked in pairs usually, me and a big ox of a man named Klaus. Klaus was from a farm in Bavaria, strong as an horse, and with a heart just as big. He never said much, but he was always there, taking the heavy end of the stretcher, grunting with the effort as we hauled some poor soul back toward the aid station. Carrying a wounded man on a stretcher during a bombing raid is something you never forget. It's like trying to run on a ship in a hurricane. The ground is constantly bucking and shaking under your feet. You'd take a step, and a blast would hit nearby and the shockwave would try to knock you over. You'd stumble, your boots sliding in the mud, the weight of the man on the stretcher pulling you down. You'd have to fight to keep your balance, to keep that stretcher level, because every jolt, every bump, would ring a moan of agony from the guy you were trying to save. His pain was your compass, your motivation. You'd look down at his face, lit by another flash, and you'd see him biting his lip until it bled, trying not to scream. "Almost there, camarade," you'd whisper, panting. Hang on, just hang on. Klaus and I developed a kind of rhythm, a grim dance. We didn't need to talk. A grunt, a nod, that was enough. We'd slide the stretcher under a man, heave him up, and then we'd start moving, a clumsy, lurching run toward what we hoped was safety. One time, a bomb landed so close that the blast picked me up and threw me face first into the mud. I lost my grip on the stretcher. For a terrifying second, I was lost, disoriented, my ears ringing. I pushed myself up, spitting out mud, and I couldn't see Klaus or the wounded man. I started to panic, calling out his name. Then I saw him. Klaus was on his knees, but he had the handles of the stretcher held up over his head, like a weightlifter, keeping the wounded man off the ground. He hadn't let go, not even when the world exploded. He just knelt there, a big, dumb, beautiful bastard, holding up his end of the bargain. We got that man back. He lived. We found out later he lost an eye, but he lived. That was a good day. There weren't many of those. The aid station was never really safe. It was usually just a cellar in a ruined village or a dugout reinforced with some timber, but it was supposed to be a sanctuary. After the all clear sounded, that's when the real horror began. The ringing in your ears would slowly fade, replaced by a new sound, a low, constant moan that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The air was thick with the smell of blood and sweat and antiseptic and fear. It was a smell that got into your clothes, your hair, deep inside your nose, and you could never wash it out. The doctor we had, Hauptmann Fischer, was a miracle worker. He was older, maybe 50, with glasses and tired eyes, and his hands were always steady, even when everything else was falling apart. He'd be working by the light of a few kerosene lamps, his arms covered in blood up to his elbows. He'd look at a man, a quick, assessing glance, and point. Him, then him, leave that one. And you'd know what leave that one meant. There was nothing to be done. Sometimes, all you could do was make them comfortable. You'd find a relatively quiet corner, prop them up and just sit with them, hold their hand. Give them a sip of water if they could swallow, talk to them. I remember one boy, he couldn't have been 17. He had a stomach wound, a bad one. There was no fixing it. He knew it, I knew it. He was cold, his skin was clammy, and he was scared, so scared. He kept asking for his father. Papa, bist du der Papa? Is that you, Papa? I looked around that cellar at the chaos, at the other men groaning and dying, and I looked back at this kid whose whole life was bleeding out into the straw on the floor. So I did the only thing I could. I leaned close, so he could hear me over the noise, and I said, Ja, mein Jung. Ich bin hier. Ich bin bei dir. Yes, my boy, I'm here. I'm with you. I held his hand, and I pretended I was his father. I talked to him about stupid things, about fishing in a lake, about the sun on your face on a summer day, anything but the war, anything but the dark cellar we were in. I watched the life fade from his eyes. It doesn't go out like a light bulb. It's slower than that, like a sunset, the light just gradually fading away until there's nothing left but an empty shell. When he was gone, I closed his eyes with my fingers, and I stood up. My legs were stiff. I had to go find the next one. There was always a next one. That was the job. You didn't have time to grieve. You stuffed it all down deep inside into a dark corner of your soul, and you kept moving, but it piles up. It piles up. The mornings after were the strangest part, the silence. After hours of deafening noise, the quiet was almost painful. You'd step out of the aid station, blinking in the grey dawn light, and the world would look alien. Everything was broken. Trees were splintered matchsticks. Buildings were just piles of rubble. The ground was a moonscape of craters. And the air still had that sweet, sickly smell of high explosive, mixed with the sharper smell of smoke and dust. You'd walk back to your own lines, your body aching in ways you didn't know it could ache, your mind numb. You'd see the other survivors emerging from their holes, their faces pale and streaked with dirt, looking like ghosts. Nobody talked much. There was nothing to say. You just nod at each other, a silent acknowledgement that you made it through another night. Then you get to the medical tent, the one for the walking wounded and for us, the medics, to get a cup of ersatz coffee that tasted like mud, but it was hot, and that was all that mattered. That's when the inventory would begin. Not an official one, just the one in your head. You'd look around at the cots. Which ones were empty? Who didn't make it back? You'd see Hans's harmonica sitting on his bedroll, and you'd know. You'd see the little photo of a girl that Ernst always carried, now lying on the ground, and your heart would sink. You'd think about the letters. That was the worst part, the part that came after the terror. The responsibility. You'd lie down on your own cot, too tired to even take your boots off, and you'd stare at the canvas roof of the tent, and you'd start writing letters in your head. Dear Frau Schmidt, your son, Karl, was a brave soldier. How do you finish that sentence? Do you tell her he died crying for her in a muddy hole in the dark? Do you tell her he died because I had to leave him to go try to save someone else? Do you tell her that I held his hand and lied to him, pretending to be his father? There are no words for that. There's no way to explain that kind of loss to a mother who's waiting for her boy to come home. The fear of those night bombers, for me, wasn't just the fear of shrapnel or blast. It was the fear of that moment the next morning. The fear of having to add another name to the list in my head, another face to the ghosts that followed me. It was a heavier burden than any stretcher, any medical bag. It's a weight I still carry. You don't ever put that down. You just learn to walk with the ache. You know, the new guys, the ersatz, they'd come in all widdied and jumpy, and funny enough, they were always more scared of the daylight raids. I could see it in them. They'd hear the air raid sirens go off in the distance, that awful wailing sound that crawled right up your spine, and they'd scramble to the edge of the trench, peering up at the sky. They wanted to see it. They needed to see it. To see the specks of the American bombers way up high, the little puffs of black flak smoke bursting around them, to watch the bombs come tumbling down like shiny, ugly seeds. For them, seeing it meant they could track it, maybe even dodge it. It gave them this false sense of control. A sense that they had some say in whether they lived or died that day. We veterans, the ones who'd been at the front for what felt like a lifetime, we knew better. We knew the daytime was a duel. It was awful, don't get me wrong, the ground shaking, the concussions hitting your chest like a fist, but it had rules. You could see your enemy. The night was something else entirely. The night was a slaughter. There were no rules in the dark. We'd watch these fresh-faced kids, boys who should have been back home chasing girls or learning a trade. We'd watch them try to dig their foxholes deeper, frantically scraping at the cold, hard earth with their entrenching tools, as if an extra 6 inches of French mud was going to save them from a 500-pound bomb. We didn't bother anymore. Oh, we'd maintain the positions, sure, but that frantic digging, that was for rookies. You learned, after a few close calls, that survival out here was mostly luck. A lottery where the price of a ticket was your youth, and the prize was simply getting to see another miserable sunrise. It was all a bloody lottery, and the house always wins in the end. You just prayed your number wasn't up that night. And you developed these little rituals, these stupid, superstitious habits that you clung to because they were the only things you could control. Every man had one. It was our way of bargaining with a guard who'd clearly forgotten this particular corner of France. My buddy Schmidt, a quiet fellow from Hamburg, he would pull out the same crumpled letter from his girl, Liesel, before every expected raid. The paper was so soft from being handled, the creases were almost worn through. He wouldn't even really read it, I don't think. He'd just hold it, his fingers tracing the words, his lips moving silently. It was his talisman. Becker, who had a dark sense of humor that kept us all sane, he had this thing about socks. Before things got hot, he'd always take off his boots and put on a clean pair of socks. He'd say, with a completely straight face, "I'm not going to be caught dead in dirty socks." And we'd all manage a weak laugh, but we understood. It was his way of spitting in death's eye, of maintaining some tiny shred of dignity. Me, I smoked my last cigarette. Not like it was my last cigarette ever, but the one I'd been saving in my breast pocket. I'd light it up as soon as we got the warning, and I'd savor every single drag, letting the smoke burn deep into my lungs. I didn't do it because I thought it would save me. That would be daft. I did it because it was a final, small pleasure. A taste of something normal, something human, before the world turned into fire and noise. And the smell, God, the smells of that waiting period. The damp wool of our uniforms, the oily scent of our rifles, the faint, coppery smell of fierce sweat, and always, underneath it all, the rich, wet smell of turned earth and decay. We never talked about the fear outright. That was the one thing you didn't do. Talking about it made it real, gave it power. Instead, the fear was in the shared silence, in the way we'd all stop whatever we were doing at the same time, our heads cocked, listening for that first, faint hum on the wind. A low, throbbing sound that you felt more than heard, a vibration that started in your feet and climbed right up into your teeth. That hum was our conversation. It said everything that needed to be said. You learned, after a while, to be an economist of fear. You had to budget your terror, save it for the things that truly mattered, because you couldn't afford to be scared of everything. The whistle of a single bomb coming down, that was just background noise. The old-timers would tell you, and it was true, you never hear the one that gets you. The ones that whistled were just passing by, giving you a nasty scare. No, what you learned to truly fear, what turned your blood to ice water, was the carpet bombing. That was the British method at night. It wasn't about precision. They weren't aiming for you, or your machine gun nest, or your command post. They were aiming for the entire grid square, the map itself. And when it started, it was like nothing else on Earth. There was no beginning and no end, just an endless rolling thunder of explosions. The first one would hit, a huge whump that slammed the air out of your lungs, and before you could even gasp, another would hit 50 meters away, and then another and another. The ground didn't just shake, it liquefied. It bucked and rolled like a live thing trying to throw you off. You'd be thrown against the side of your hole, your helmet slamming into the dirt, your teeth rattling in your head. The concussions would hit you, one after another, a relentless physical pounding that left you bruised and disoriented. The air would get so thick with dust and smoke and cordite that you couldn't see your hand in front of your face, and you'd taste it, this gritty, bitter paste on your tongue. And the light, it wasn't like daylight. It was a hellish, strobing flicker of orange and white, flashes so bright they burned onto the back of your eyelids, illuminating the world in snapshots of pure chaos. A tree splintering into matchsticks, a geyser of dirt and stone erupting skyward, the terrified face of the man next to you, his mouth a perfect O of silent scream. The sound was so immense it wasn't even sound anymore. It was a physical pressure that swallowed everything, even your own thoughts. You'd open your mouth to scream, and no sound would come out, or if it did, you couldn't hear it. The fear became a physical thing, a cold, hard knot in your gut, a trembling in your hands that you couldn't stop. But after a while, and this is the part that's hard to explain to anyone who wasn't there, it just became part of the background noise, like the constant hunger in your belly or the bone-deep fatigue that never went away. You learned to function in spite of it. You'd be crouched in your hole, pissing yourself with terror, and yet some part of your brain would still be counting the seconds between blasts or noting the shift in the wind. You became a machine, a scared, tired machine, just trying to keep its parts together until the storm passed. And when it did pass, when the last echoes of the bombs faded away and that terrible hum receded back into the night, you didn't feel relief. Not really. Relief was too sharp, too clean an emotion for what we felt. What you felt was tired, a deep, hollowed-out exhaustion that went right down to your soul. The silence that followed was almost louder than the bombs themselves, a ringing, high-pitched whine in your ears that would be your companion for the next day or so. Then came the routine. You'd shake the dirt off of you, check your rifle was clear, and then you'd start calling out names into the darkness. Schmidt, a grunt from the left. Becker, a cough from the right. You go down the list, your voice flat, emotionless. Sometimes there'd be no answer, just a silence that said everything. You climb out of your hole, your legs wobbly, and make your way over to where his position was supposed to be. Sometimes you'd find nothing but a fresh crater, steaming in the night air, smelling of burnt earth and something else, something sweet and metallic. Other times you'd find him still there, but not. Another face gone, just like that. You'd look at him for a moment with a dull sense of routine, and then you'd shrug. It was a small, helpless gesture. What else was there to do? You go through his pockets, take his identification tags, and then you divide up his rations, his ammunition, any cigarettes he might have had. There was no time for grief. Grief was a luxury for people who slept in beds, for people whose world hadn't been stripped down to its most basic, brutal components. Grief required energy, and we had none to spare. It required a belief in a future, and that was a belief we couldn't afford to have. The night bombers, you see, they didn't make us brave. Bravery implies a choice. We had no choice. They made us numb. They sanded down all our sharp edges, all our soft parts, until we were just smooth, hard stones. And that numbness, that emotional frostbite, that was the only way to live through it. It was the only way to wake up the next morning, to look at the new crater where your friend used to be, to eat his share of the black bread, and to somehow find the will to go on. Because going on was all there was. Home was a distant dream, a photograph in your pocket that was starting to fade. The front, the mud, the fear, the numb survival that was the only reality we had left. And you held on to that reality with everything you had, because letting go meant you'd already lost. My dearest Elsa, I start every letter the same way. I tell you the food is adequate, the weather is cold, and I am in good health. These are the lies we all tell. The ones that pass the censor with a rubber stamp and a bored glance. The script we follow so as not to worry the ones we love back home. The official record of a life that isn't real, this letter though, the one I'm scratching out now by the guttering flame of a stolen candle. This one I will fold small and burn later. This is the one where I tell you the truth, the kind of truth that gets stuck in your throat and tastes like copper and dust. The truth is, my love, I'm more frightened than I have ever been in my life. And it's not of the Tommies in their trenches across the field or the occasional crack of a sniper's rifle. No, I've come to terms with that kind of fear. It's a man's fear, a soldier's fear, something you can understand and almost respect. The fear I live with now, the one that has taken root deep in my gut, is a different beast altogether. It's the fear of the darkness itself, because the darkness here, on this cursed stretch of French soil, has a sound, and that sound is the low, steady, thrumming drone of British bomber engines, a sound that begins as a whisper on the wind, a vibration you feel in your teeth before you even hear it, a noise that makes the hair on your arms stand up. They come with the night. You see, that's the worst of it. The day belongs to the Luftwaffe. Or at least that's what the propaganda company tells us, with their clean uniforms and their cameras. But the night belongs entirely to them, to those ghosts in the sky. And we are just mice waiting in a field for the owls. It starts at sunset, this slow, creeping dread. It's not a sharp fear, like the sudden whistle of an artillery shell. That's over in a flash, one way or another. This is a slow poison. It's watching the light bleed out of the sky and knowing what it carries with it. It's the silence that falls over our position, not a peaceful silence, but a thick, heavy quiet, broken only by the shuffling of boots and the low mutters of the men. We all get quiet, even old man Bauer, who's been through the Great War and usually never shuts up about it. Even he goes silent, just stares at the horizon, his hands trembling slightly as he cleans his rifle for the 10th time that hour. We check our watches. We listen, always listening. And then one of the boys, usually young Klaus with his ears like a bat, he'll say it. Do you hear that? At first you don't. You think it's just the blood pounding in your own ears. But then it comes, a low hum like a distant beehive, and your stomach just drops right out of you. That's the moment, Elsa. That's the moment when you stop being a soldier and you become a creature of pure instinct. All you want to do is dig a hole straight down to the center of the earth and hide. But you can't. You have to stand your watch, or you huddle in your foxhole, and you wait. The hum gets louder, splitting into dozens. Then hundreds of individual engines, a chorus of doom coming from every direction at once. You can't pinpoint it. It just fills the sky, this awful, relentless noise. And then the searchlights snap on, frantic white fingers scraping at the blackness, trying to claw those bombers out of the sky. And when they catch one, for a second it's almost beautiful, a tiny silver cross suspended in the beam. And then the flak starts. The ack-ack guns open up. The sky explodes with flashes of orange and red. The black puffs of smoke blooming all around them. It's a terrifying, magnificent sight, like the world's worst fireworks display. And you find yourself praying, not for your own soul, but that they hit one, that they send one of those damned birds spinning down in flames, just so the noise will stop, just so you can feel like you're fighting back. But they just keep coming. The formation is so tight, so disciplined, they fly right through the flak as if it's just a bad storm. They have a job to do. And nothing we throw at them seems to stop them. And then you hear it, a new sound, a soft, whistling sound that starts high above and gets louder and louder, a sound that sucks all the air out of your lungs. That's the bombs, my love. That's the sound of death falling out of the sky right on top of you. You press yourself into the dirt. You try to make yourself as small as possible. You wrap your arms around your helmet, and you pray to a God you're not sure is listening anymore. The first impact isn't a sound. It's a feeling. The ground itself heaves. It bucks and shakes like a living thing trying to throw you off. Dirt and stones rain down on your back. Your ears pop from the pressure change. The concussions hit you in the chest, knocking the wind out of you, one after another after another. It's not an explosion. It's an earthquake that goes on for minutes that feel like hours. The world is noise and light and shaking. You can smell it, the acrid tang of cordite, the thick dust, the sour smell of your own fear. You keep your eyes squeezed shut, but the flashes are so bright you see them through your eyelids. And in those flashes, I see you, I see your face. I see our children laughing in the garden back home. That's the only light in that utter blackness. The memory of your smile, it's the one thing they can't balm away. The one thing that is mine and mine alone. I hold onto that image like a lifeline. I whisper your name into the mud. A secret prayer against the chaos after it's over. There's a silence that's even worse than the waiting, a ringing, hollow silence, broken by the crackle of fires starting and the distant, terrible screams of the wounded. That's when we crawl out of our holes like ghosts, covered in white dust, looking at each other with wide, shocked eyes, checking if everyone is still there, if all the pieces are still attached. That's when the dark humor starts. It's the only way we can cope. Someone will say, "Well, that was a close one, almost spilled my coffee," and we'll all laugh. A ragged, desperate sound, because there is no coffee, there's just mud and terror and the lingering smell of high explosives. We become different people in those moments. Elsa, you wouldn't recognize us. We're hollowed out, our nerves are shot. We jump at the sound of a branch snapping. One of the new replacements. A kid from Hamburg, no older than 18. He cried the whole time during the last raid, just sat in his hole and sobbed. And afterwards, nobody teased him, nobody said a word. We just gave him a cigarette and sat with him, because we've all been that boy. We've all had that moment where the weight of it all becomes too much. You see things in the aftermath that you can't forget, things I will never be able to tell you, things that keep me awake long after the all clear has sounded. The way a burning truck casts long, dancing shadows, the smell of things that should never be burned, the sheer, awesome power of it all. It makes you feel so small, so insignificant, like an ant under a boot. Start to envy the infantryman, his enemy. At least he can see the man he's fighting. He can aim his rifle. He can feel like he has some control. For us, there is no enemy. There is only the sky, and the noise, and the waiting. I carry a few things with me to get through it. We all have our talismans. I have the photograph of you, the one from our wedding day, with you smiling, that shy smile I fell in love with. But I don't look at it during the raids. I'm superstitious about it. I'm afraid that if I look at it, it will be the last thing I see, that your face will be the final image burned into my mind before I'm blown to pieces. So I keep it in my left breast pocket, tucked inside my paybook, a secret warmth against my heart, a piece of home that's always with me. The other thing I carry is a small, smooth stone from the creek behind our house. Remember that creek? Where I proposed to you. I picked it up the day I left. It's gray and flat, and fits perfectly in the palm of my hand. When the bombs are falling and the world is ending, I clench that stone in my fist. I hold it so tight the edges bite into my skin. And I think about the sound of the water rushing over it. I think of the dappled sunlight through the trees. I think of your hand in mine. It's my anchor. It's the one thing that reminds me of a world that still has order. A world that still makes sense. A world where I am a man. A husband, a father, and not just a target in a hole, these small things. Elsa, they are what keep me human. They are the thin thread that connects me to the person I used to be. Because without them, I would become like some of the others, the 1,000-yard stares, the men who have just given up, who move through the day like automatons. Their spirit's already broken, they've seen too much, lost too much. They're just empty shells waiting for the end. I see them, and I pray to God I don't become one of them. I have to hold on to the anger sometimes, the anger at the politicians and the generals who put us here. The anger at the pilots up there in their warm cockpits, high above the mud and the blood. They have no idea what it's like down here. They just press a button and entire worlds are erased. But the anger doesn't last. It just burns out, leaving only the cold, hard knot of fear in its place. The friendships here are the only thing that make it bearable. They're deeper than any friendship I've ever known. We rely on each other for everything, for a dry pair of socks, for a shared crust of bread, for the simple comfort of another human voice in the darkness. My buddy, Friedrich. He's a big, quiet fellow from a farm in Bavaria. He doesn't say much, but last week, during a particularly bad raid, he just reached over and put his hand on my shoulder, didn't say a word, just left it there, a solid, heavy weight, and it was the only thing that kept me from completely losing my nerve. That's a bond you can't explain. It's forged in terror and hardship. It's a language of shared looks and small gestures. It's the knowledge that the man next to you is just as scared as you are, and that you're in this hell together. We talk about home, of course, it's our favorite subject. We describe the meals we'll eat, the beers we'll drink, the simple pleasure of sleeping in a soft bed. Friedrich talks about his wife's potato pancakes for hours, describing the way they smell, the way they crackle in the pan. It's torture. But it's a sweet torture. It keeps us going. This homesickness is a physical ache, a constant hollow feeling in your chest. It's worse than any hunger. You dream of mundane things, Elsa, of walking to the market, of reading the newspaper, of tucking the children into bed. And you wake up to the sound of artillery and the taste of mud. And for a moment, you don't know where you are, and the disappointment is crushing. I try to remember the good times, like that holiday we took to the Black Forest. Remember the smell of the pine trees after the rain. I try to cling to that memory, to wrap myself in it, but it's like trying to hold on to smoke. The present is too loud, too immediate. It drowns out the past. I often think about what you're doing at that very moment. Are you hanging the laundry? Are you reading to the children? Is the sun shining on your face? I hope so. I hope you're surrounded by light and warmth and peace. All the things that are absent from this God-forsaken place. This letter is already too long, and I've said too much. My candle is almost guttered out, casting long, dancing shadows on the wall of this ruined cellar we're using as a billet. I can hear the others snoring, the occasional mutter from a nightmare, and in the distance, the ever-present rumble of the front, a constant reminder that it's never really over. I cannot send this letter to you, my darling. It would be the cruelest thing I could do, to make you share this terror, to burden your heart with the images that haunt my dreams. This is my cross to bear, not yours. Your job is to stay safe, to keep the home fires burning, to live in that world of sanity that I am fighting for. So I will not mail this. I will fold it small. And when I light my cigarette in the morning, I will use this paper. I will watch the words, all these truths I can never share. Curl and blacken and turn to smoke, and I will try to breathe that smoke deep into my lungs, hoping that some of this fear, this dread, will go with it, rising up and dissipating into the cold morning air. But before I do, I make a promise to you. I write it here on this paper that you will never see. I swear it on my life, on our love, on the future of our children. I will come home. I will walk through our front door. I will take you in my arms, and I will never let go. I will not let the night take me. I will not become a name on a telegram, a statistic in this stupid, endless war. This, my dearest Elsa, is the only truth that matters, the only one I can allow myself to believe. Everything else is just waiting, just surviving until that day comes, until I am home with you, where I belong. The worst part was the waiting. That's the truth of it they never tell you in the recruiting office. It wasn't the charge or the firefight. It was the hours squeezed into the mud, just you and the dark, and the sound of your own heart knocking against your ribs. But the nights were a special kind of hell. When the sun went down, the real war started for us, the war against the bombers. You'd hear them long before you saw them, a low drone like a million angry bees getting closer and closer, a sound that got inside your skull and vibrated right down into your teeth. It wasn't like the daylight raids. Those were clean, almost clinical. You could see the planes, you could see the bombs falling, you could fight back. At least in your head you felt like you had a chance. But the night took that away. The night was a blanket they threw over you before they started beating you senseless. The first flares would go up, these ghostly Christmas lights hanging in the sky, and suddenly the whole world would be bathed in this sickly, pale green light that made everyone look like a corpse. Then the pounding would start. Not individual booms, but a continuous world-ending roar that made the earth heave like a living thing. You'd be down in your hole, curled up tight, your hands clamped over your ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't outside you, it was inside. It was in the marrow of your bones. You'd smell it, too. The thick, sulphurous stink of cordite, the wet dog smell of churned-up earth, and underneath it all, the faint, coppery tang of furthat was us, that smell. We all reeked of it. You'd taste the dirt in your mouth, grit cracking between your teeth with every concussive blast. And you just wait, bargaining with God, with the universe, with anyone who might be listening, promising anything, everything, just to live until the sun came up. You weren't a soldier then. You were just an animal, a terrified kid hiding in a hole, praying for the noise to stop. And then, just as sudden as it started, it would. The drone would fade, moving on to some other poor bastards down the line, and an unearthly silence would fall. Not a true silence, because your ears would be ringing like cathedral bells, and somewhere always there'd be the moaning. The cries of the wounded men calling for their mothers, for water, for help. That was worse than the bombs in a way. That sound stuck with you. When the sun finally began to rise, it was like a miracle. A grey, weary light creeping over the cratered landscape, and with it came this understanding, this unspoken truce. No officer ever ordered it, no white flags were waved. It just happened. The fighting would stop. Both sides were just too spent, too hollowed out by the night's terror to even think about killing each other. We were all in the same club, you see, a club no one wanted to join, the survivors of the night. I remember one morning, after a particularly bad one, the sky was this dull, washed-out grey, and the air was so thick with dust and smoke you could taste the bitterness of burnt things on your tongue. I risked a look over the parapet, my hands still shaking so bad I could barely hold the binoculars steady. And I saw them. The Tommies. They were climbing out of their holes, stretching, moving slow, like old men. They were covered in the same grime, their uniforms the same color of mud as ours. One of them lit a cigarette, the flare of the match a tiny, peaceful star in the gloom. He just stood there, smoking, not even bothering to take cover. And we watched him. My buddy, Klaus, was next to me, his face a mask of dried mud with two tired blue eyes staring out. He just shook his head slowly. No one raised a rifle. No one even thought about it. It was an understanding that went deeper than any order from a general. We had all endured the same storm. In that moment, he wasn't the enemy. He was just another poor bastard who'd made it through, just like me. He was probably thinking about a girl back in London, same as I was thinking of Helga back in Hamburg. It made the whole stupid, bloody war feel like a distant, idiotic dream. There was a strange peace in those hours, a peace I've never felt since. The fear of the night bombers was the great equalizer. It didn't care about your nationality, your rank, your politics. It just wanted to tear you apart. And having survived it, we were all bound together by that shared exhaustion. I remember another time, after a bombardment that had been so fierce it felt like the sky was falling in pieces. The moaning from the British lines was constant. Then we saw a soldier stand up, a strip of white cloth tied to his rifle. He shouted across the field, his voice thin and strained in the morning air. "Hey, Fritz, you got a medic? We're out of bandages." There was a long pause. We looked at our medic, a quiet man named Heinrich who'd been a country doctor before all this. He didn't say a word. He just nodded, rooted around in his bag, and threw a whole pack of bandages wrapped in waxed paper in a high arc over the wire. It landed with a soft thud in the mud between the lines. The British soldier scrambled out, grabbed it, and shouted a quick "Thanks, mate," before disappearing back into his trench. A week later it was our turn to be short, and they did the same for us, tossed over a can of morphine syrettes. You see, these weren't acts of treason. That's what the brass would have called it. They were acts of sanity, a recognition that underneath the uniforms we were all just men, and men sometimes need a little help, even from the other side. In that morning light, we'd have to face the wreckage. The craters were enormous, some so deep and dark they looked like they went straight down to the center of the earth. The ground was chewed up, unrecognizable, and we'd have to start the miserable work of filling them in, shoveling dirt like damned souls, both us and the Tommies, laboring under the same tired sun. It was during this cleanup that you'd find the things that really got to you, the personal things. I once found a photograph half buried in the mud. It was of a woman and a little girl, smiling, their faces smeared with dirt. The photograph was curled and wet. I wiped it clean on my tunic sleeve. I didn't know if it had fallen from the pocket of one of our boys or one of theirs. It didn't matter, not one bit. It was a piece of someone's life, a life that was waiting for him somewhere, a life that had probably just ended in the mud a few hours before. I found a broken harmonica once, and a waterlogged letter, the ink blurred into blue clouds, only a few words legible. "Hi, dearest, when this is over." It made the enemy not a monster, not some faceless devil, but just another poor bastard like me, with a family, with dreams, with a heart that probably ached for home just as much as mine did. We'd collect these things sometimes, these sad little relics, and put them in a quiet spot. It was a kind of ritual, a burial for the men they belonged to. We had our own little rituals, us in the squad. My friend, Erich, he was a carpenter from Bremen, always had a deck of cards with him. The edges were frayed and soft from all the handling. After a bad night, once the sun was properly up and the truce felt solid, he'd deal out a hand of scat. We wouldn't play for money, just for something to do, to force our minds to think about something other than the noise and the fear. The smell of cheap tobacco from our cigarettes would mix with the smell of coffee brewing on a small, hidden stoverial coffee, not that vile ersatz stuff, if we were lucky with a supply drop. That was the best smell in the world, I tell you. It smelled like life. We'd talk, but not about the war. We'd talk about food. God, we'd talk about food for hours. Klaus would describe his mother's sauerbraten in such detail you could almost taste it. The tang of the vinegar, the softness of the potatoes. I'd talk about the plum cake my Helga baked, how the kitchen would fill with the sweet, spicy smell. We'd talk about girls, of course, and home, and what we'd do when we got back. It was all a fantasy, a shared dream we built to keep the reality of our situation at bay. There was a dark humor, too. You had to have it, or you go mad. When a rat, fat as a kitten, would run across the top of the trench, someone would always joke, "There goes the sergeant major, inspecting the lines." It wasn't funny, not really, but we'd laugh anyway, a dry, ragged sound. It was that or cry. But the truce never lasted. It was as fragile as a soap bubble. You could feel it coming to an end. The sun would climb higher, the light would get harder, and the strange spell of the dawn would begin to wear off. Maybe a nervous new replacement, a kid with wide, scared eyes who hadn't learned the rules yet, would fire a shot at a shadow. Or an officer, fresh from a briefing in some comfortable chateau miles behind the lines, would come down and start barking orders, talking about maintaining offensive posture and not showing weakness to the enemy. They didn't get it. They hadn't been in the holes with us. They hadn't felt the earth trying to swallow them whole. And just like that, the spell would be broken. A single, sharp crack of a rifle shot would echo across the field, and the silence would shatter. You'd see the Tommies duck down, and we'd do the same. The moment was over. We'd become German soldiers and British soldiers again, enemies with a job to do. We'd shoulder our rifles, our hands steady now, the brief humanity of the morning locked away in a deep, hidden part of ourselves. I think about those mornings often, even now, all these years later. More than the battles, more than the victories or the defeats. I think about that British soldier standing up to stretch and the quiet understanding between us. For those few precious hours, the war wasn't about flags or Führers or kings. It was about survival. And in that, we were all on the same side. The fear of those British night bombers, that relentless, impersonal terror from the sky, was the one thing we truly had in common with the men in the opposite trench. It was the great leveler. It reminded us that before we were soldiers, we were just men. Young men who wanted to live, to go home, to see our families again. That fear stripped everything else away. And in the fragile peace of the dawn, we were allowed, just for a little while, to be human again. It's a strange thing to say, but in the middle of all that horror, those were the most human moments of the whole damned war.